be as distinct in this Confederate cemetery story, the story about A.P. Stewart, General Confederate, whose monument is in front of the courthouse, the county courthouse in Hamilton County, is really the mildness of the demands, the mildness of the rebukes laid against the past, laid against whites by the black establishment, by Mayor Andy Burke. The complaint against these statues, the complaint that the city has, that it is somehow connected with as trustee with the Confederate cemetery near UTC and Erlanger, these are just mild. They're so small. They're poignantly small. They're poignantly, in a way, trivial. The word trivial, I think, is used to complain about Mayor Burke's desire to separate the city from that cemetery by Clint Cooper in his editorial. It is a trivial gesture that he can magnify among his constituents, showing his race credentials in proper form. And yet, from my perspective, which is that of liberty, of manumission, right? My goal here at the David Tulis program on Nooga Radio is manumission. Manumission is not a mispronunciation of the part of the car that changes gear, right? That's transmission. Manumission is something different, and that is the liberation of a slave into a higher and better estate, a better legal status, and that's being free. Now, we're not free people today, and that's because we have national government in Washington that has enslaved all of us, and all the states have been enslaved or bought off. So we're not really free people, and our legal status in the common law, and even under statute, if we want to analyze it through that, or even through the Uniform Commercial Code, is not free, but rather we have taken on the fruits of being beneficiaries of various trusts. Now, these trusts are not, I guess they are somewhat like that which oversaw the ownership and maintenance of the cemetery, but there is a way of looking at national government and the national welfare state as a kind of trust or series of trusts in which we become the beneficiaries. And think if you're getting welfare, you're a beneficiary. If you're getting tax return money, you're a beneficiary. And you're taking part in a franchise. That franchise is the system whereby we are all one, right? We are unified nationally already, even though we hear exhortations from President Trump and members of Congress and Senator Lamar Alexander, who says he wants to get rid of the Nathan Bedford Forrest statute in Nashville, so we can be unified, right? We already have effectively a great unity in the law. Legally, we are all unified as subjects of Congress, as U.S. persons, as beneficiaries of the system. Now, that system, some would say, is very liberating and very exciting. It is American. It is unique in the world. And yet, really, it is not unique in the world. Many countries, well, I would say probably every one, maybe with a couple of exceptions in Africa, these countries, these nations are all socialized, right? They all have socialistic systems and effectively communal or collective ownership of business, of the marketplace, of commerce, and down into the house, every house on your block, down through the front door, there is sweeping under the door jamb, as it were, the claim of possession, the claim of propriety, which is to say ownership. There's a kind of ownership claim that the state makes upon its people in many, many ways. And those ways are traced by some of the better writers whom you can read. I mentioned Martin van Creveld, for example, the Dutchman who is a historian at, I think, Haifa University in Israel, and is a globally known military analyst and a strategist hired by governments and by big companies and the like, and makes speeches, and he writes books, some of which I've read, a historian, especially in military history. And one book, for example, that I like to refer to is The Rise and Decline of the State. There we see how the modern state has claimed propriety in people like you. You, my listener, are sort of effectively owned by the modern state. And the struggle for the future, if there is one, is very favorable, and here's why: because the state is fighting a rearguard action, and the state is losing. And what's winning long term are two major forces. One of them larger than the other. The major one is Christianity, which is all about liberation, all about freedom, all about justice and equity, all about minimal systems of government which right wrongs and provide a venue for disputants, that would be courts, and a means of the sword, the proper use of the sword on the earth. That's by the king or the government, if you will, the civil magistrate, the judge. And that's a system where there is no total state, right? There is no mega bureaucracy. There is no pyramid of administration such as the one we have today. Look at the back of your $1 bill and see the great brickwork and the pyramid on the back there, which is our modern system. Every nation state in the world has that. And it's run by the people at the top. These are the elite families, many of them very old families. In Greece, in Portugal, in France, they're all the old families. And they just run things now differently than when they were run during the times of kings, the times of fiefdoms, and forms of personal government of olden year, where the inefficiencies of government, the inefficiencies of technology permitted, didn't permit the rise of the modern total state, and allowed and permitted decentralized political and economic order. But of course, that was swept away finally by the Industrial Revolution and the change in politics and change in the way people viewed the state, not with suspicion, not with hatred, but with admiration and love, and real worship, a kind of religious worship that has afflicted mankind, you might say, since at least since the late 1800s. It really got very bad. Then the 1840s is when we have the rise of Marxist revolutionary thinking. And if you read, let's see, who wrote Fire in the Minds of Men by Billington, that would be a very authoritative tracing of the rise of revolution from about the 1840s. Though in the late 1700s, there were, of course, revolutionary thinking as well. And even before that, pro-statist thinking that was from the 1600s and even the 1500s, but the revolutionary thinking in the 1840s. Well, so we have this modern system of the state, and we have stories in the press today about that touch on these questions. The mayor continuing to take heavy fire for making Wade Hinton having a scruple and having Wade Hinton try to make efforts to separate the city as trustee of this cemetery fire, not just from editorialists such as Colin Cowherd at the Chattanooga Times Free Press, but also many highly articulate people writing, and their essays and letters appearing in great volume today, starting Saturday, at Chattanoogan.com, John Wilson's longtime and I'd say pretty respectable news website here in Chattanooga. And my own offering today goes into this mildness, the mildness of the black demands, the black complaint about General A.P. Stewart, the man who is responsible for much effort toward reconciliation and building in our area, establishing in our area the military parks, which view granting equal nobility to the gray and the blue. These military parks, which are either legal federal jurisdiction or practical federal jurisdiction, and a man who was not a racist, who was not a slaver, who was not someone who denigrated blacks or anything like that, but who had a real mission, a kind of pro-government mission, to neutralize the bad feeling of the war by having these grand parks and viewing all the participants as Americans, all the participants as American soldiers and the like, and having in his own way that great labor. But the problem that we want to look at, and that I think is worth thinking about, is how mild Andy Berke is and what he's saying about black people, and the ancient references to slavery that would be the monument of General Stewart and this cemetery connection downtown. It's mild because it allows small things to be accomplished, and it allows the press and the common mind, the common discourse, to magnify these small things and show proof that Andy Berke and that Dr. Eleanor Woods, the dentist who is the president of the local NAACP, that they have the interest of blacks in view, and that if we simply take care of these details, cover the monument, remove the monument, put General Stewart at the Chattanooga History Museum or some replacement thereof, then we'll be back to normal, and we'll have found our balance. We'll have found equanimity. We'll have found peace again in Hamilton County. Well, there is there is a list of elements of modern slavery that I'm offering today, and I'm also being mild. I'm also being I don't want to belabor the point, though I'm afraid the number 10 is a bit belaboring the point. There are 10 forms of slavery today, which the black man, or to which the black man and the black woman and the black family are subject. Now, I say black because I want to highlight that they are often the chief victims of these forms of slavery, and sometimes they're the chief beneficiaries. Now, because slavery has advantages. Okay, we have to understand that slavery, whether it's in the chattel form or the modern form, has advantages and benefits. There's no doubt about it. That's why people often prefer to be slaves. In fact, the Word of God has a provision for slavery in the old Hebrew Republic, that if you wanted to remain with your master and remain with him as his slave forever, you had a public demonstration of that, and that was the piercing of the earlobe by an awl on the doorpost. And that was something publicly witnessed. It was a little strange. That's why it became a public record, because people remember that strange thing, right? And the Bible often has public events that mark unusual things. For example, if you, a brother, did not take the widow of your dead brother to wife and give her seed, in other words, impregnate her to give her child so that brother's line could continue, well, woe to you. And what happened is, in public, I think she would take her shoe off and spit on it, and I'm not remembering now exactly, but she would do something in that direction, and you would be known forever as the man who did not take his brother's widow to wife to raise up seed in his name. You were the one who didn't do that duty, that loving duty to your family, and that's called a levirate. You did not take part in the levirate marriage. You rejected that, and so you had some wiggle room there. But if you didn't do it, you were in public humiliated with the man whose shoes taken off, and so the Bible has public records like that. And if you were a slave in the Old Republic, remember the Old Republic among the children of Israel was a confederation. It was like the Confederacy, though it had many advantages that the Confederacy did not. In that time, you had a great deal of liberty, and in fact, the whole Old Testament is God's public policy. The New Testament is more, if you read Gary North's discussion about these differences, the New Testament is more about private dealings with God. The Old is more about the public dealings with God, the dealings of God and nations, right? Confederations, kingdoms, empires, lords, and magistrates. The Old Testament is about public policy, if you will, and the New about personal repentance and God's care for the individual. Both are essential. You can't have a theory of progress. You can't have a theory of reform if you don't have both of those books, right? The New and the Old Testament together, according to basic Christian teaching, comprise the Word of God, and one cannot discount either of these volumes. The Old, in fact, being much thicker than the New, and having more books and dealing with public questions. So the mayor and Eleanor Woods and others who are concerned Citizens for Justice, and Chattanooga Organized for Action, verbs, groups like that, who are generally progressive liberals and Democrat-oriented, they in declaiming, in criticizing racism, in speaking ill of white supremacy, accept other kinds of supremacy. They accept a supremacy that I would say is probably worse than white supremacy, and that is state supremacy and statutory supremacy and government supremacy. These are forms of supremacy that are truly vile. And they're vile because they are forms of thievery. And there are 10. There are 10, at least 10 forms of supremacy that have subjugated black people today. Now, you're asking, what am I talking about? Well, go to Nooganomics.com, Nooganomics.com. That is the website for the Man Who Matters. And this morning, I finally got off my chest this account of the 10 links of the chain, if you will, that keep black people in subjugation. Just one of them. Let me just mention one, and that is bail bonds. Okay, and I mentioned that as one of the 10 points as a kind of a sub point. And bail bonds and the whole bonding industry, and the fact that judges incarcerate people before trial is a form of slavery, and it comes out of policing. Right, this is an important element of the police state that we have in Tennessee, and that's the bail bond industry. If you're jailed before trial because you can't afford the bond, right? Well, you lose your job, you don't show up the next day, you're going to get fired. And people who are not guilty of a crime, they plea bargain guilt. Why? Because they can't afford the bond, and if they can't afford the bond, they're going to be in jail for weeks in Hamilton County Jail until their trial, and they can't afford to do that. So they plead guilty. Guess what happens when you plead guilty? You're a black man and you're pleading guilty. You had a 17-year-old offense. You ran away from cops when you were 20. All right, that's the second case, also plea bargain. And here now you're 24, and your third one, you are damaged goods. You are damaged goods, and you're damaged as much by things that you've done that are foolish, but you're damaged in perpetuity by the state and the state's record and the state's blighting you with guilt or admission of guilt. The Journal of Legal Studies found that when judges assigned a money bail, suspects are 12% more likely to be convicted, in part because they're more likely to plead guilty to avoid jail, and in part because they had less access to public defense. Of course, these are profound future implications for black people, especially. There was a picture in ProPublica story that ran ran on Monday, picked up in a website in Tennessee that had the city court in Nashville, just like ours. Everybody in line except one person was black. Everybody was black except for one person in that photograph. They're all waiting to get into the court so that they can plead guilty. Pretrial detention is devastating. A Pew study finds that incarceration reduces individuals' yearly earnings by 40%. Formerly incarcerated Americans, as it says in the Foundation for Economic Education, a great report on this point, are hit even harder over the course of their lifetime. By age 48, quote, the typical former inmate will have earned $179,000 less than if he had never been incarcerated. And this doesn't factor in the loss of income jailed individuals suffer while they're waiting for their trial. Okay, they're waiting for trial and they're suffering. Jail hurts poor people twice. Okay, here's how that happens. Once by depriving them of income behind bars, and once more by stigmatizing them once they are free. The end result is less income mobility. Formerly incarcerated men in the bottom earnings quintile are twice as likely to still be there 20 years later compared to men who were never sent to jail or prison. While this is due to the fact that incarcerated individuals are more likely to be frequent criminals, part is due to the negative effects of every one jail stretch. And if you're in jail because you couldn't pay the bond, you're in jail for weeks, your children are 3 times more likely to, at some point, be jail inmates. And this is called intergenerational poverty. According to a meta-study on the subject, children with incarcerated parents are 3 times more likely to end up incarcerated themselves. Having a jailed mom or dad can leave children with psychological scars, depression, and even aggravated learning disability. Even when individuals make bail and remain free until trial, as Hanson Melvin did, they often require a bail bond to do so. And a bail bond is payment. It's like an insurance company that the the bondsman makes on your behalf. And of course, that whole industry is highly leveraged, as we've read in the press in the past 20 years. Often there's no real money there. There's just leverage and promises to pay. These companies often charge a payment of 10% of bail. The average bail for a felony is $10,000. And even misdemeanors often have four-figure bail amounts. Bail bonds often amount to a substantial fine for the working poor who are ill-equipped to pay. So in other words, if you have cash, you can pay your own bail and get it back 100%. But if you're poor, you have to pay the bail bondsman. But he keeps 10% of the total. That's his living, and that's reasonable and understandable. But you, the poor man, you're just out. Well, this is David Tulis, brought to you by Nooganomics.com. The number is 800-8949. 800-8949. There are 10 forms of slavery that black people overlook. I'd say they overlook it. And you, my listener, you, my reader, can find out what these 10 are by going to Nooganomics.com. That's Nooganomics. Nooganomics.com. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader, Nooga Radio.